At 2:17 a.m., the bus lay on its side in the Arizona desert, engine ticking as it cooled, headlights cutting thin tunnels through blowing sand, passengers standing barefoot on the asphalt counting each other in whispers, water already spilling into the dark. The driver unconscious, the road empty in both directions, and the heat waiting just beyond the horizon. Because in this place, survival was never about the crash. It was about what followed when the silence stayed and no one came. Arizona, June 1984. A night bus moved south through a stretch of highway that existed mostly in memory. Long straight lines swallowed by darkness. The interior dim and heavy with sleep. Bodies slumped in seats. Breath-fogging windows faintly from recycled air. The engine humming steadily and confidently. A sound that made everyone on board believe the road was under control. The driver relaxed but alert, hands light on the wheel. Years on this route turning miles into habit rather than distance. The desert outside unseen but assumed calm and predictable. The change came without warning. The wind rising sharply, sand sliding across the asphalt in pale moving sheets, headlights catching it and throwing it straight back like smoke. Visibility collapsing so fast the road didn't fade but vanished. The driver easing off instinctively. Tires drifting, steering pulling harder than expected. Weight shifting wrong, unmistakably wrong. The bus leaning, sliding sideways, metal screaming against stone, glass shattering once, luggage tearing loose from racks, bodies slamming into seats and each other, gravity making a final decision, then everything stopping at once, sudden and absolute. Silence followed, thick and suffocating, broken only by coughing, low groans, someone crying without sound, the engine ticking as it cooled, each second loud and mechanical. People moving slowly now, stunned, crawling through broken windows and the emergency hatch, hands scraping metal, feet sinking into cool sand, the desert opening around them like an enormous empty room, flat and endless. No lights anywhere, no buildings, no sound, but wind brushing softly across the ground. The driver lay slumped near the wheel, breathing but not waking. The radio lifted and turned until only static answered back, phones glowing briefly before being lowered again. No signal, not even a flicker. Water gathered and counted in silence. Only a few bottles intact, already warm, already not enough. People sitting close together without speaking, eyes returning again and again to the road, empty in both directions, as the horizon began to pale almost imperceptibly. The air still cool but changing fast, a realization spreading without words, heavy and unavoidable. The crash was over. The danger they understood had passed. And now the waiting began, because the desert was awake, and it knew they were there. The sun rose faster than anyone expected, the cool air draining away minute by minute, shadows shrinking beneath the overturned bus, metal warming to the touch, people shifting restlessly as daylight exposed everything the night had hidden, the wreckage smaller and more fragile than it had felt in the dark. The desert suddenly vast and unavoidable, stretching flat in every direction with no promise written on it. Water was counted again. Then counted once more, bottles passed hand to hand, caps used as measures, a sip here, a pause there, not enough to ease fear, only enough to sharpen it. Someone insisting they should stay close to the bus because it was shelter, shade, something visible from the road. Another voice arguing that the road itself was the answer, that cars had to come eventually, that standing still out here felt like waiting to dry out. The first real argument began quietly. A confident voice saying, Phoenix wasn't that far. That walking early was smarter than waiting for the heat to peak. That roads always led somewhere. An arm pointing south where the asphalt disappeared into glare. The idea landing heavily because it sounded logical, because it offered movement instead of waiting. People looking at the horizon, at their feet, at the bus, doing silent calculations with distance and strength. They split without drama. No shouting yet, just different fears pulling in opposite directions, some staying behind near the bus, clinging to the belief that rescue came to those who waited. Others stepping onto the road, walking fast at first. Optimism lending speed, shoes slapping against asphalt already warming. The bus shrinking behind them with every step, becoming smaller than it should have been. Minutes stretched into longer minutes. The sun climbing higher, the road offering no shade. Heat radiating up through soles and legs. Breath turning shallow. Conversation fading. The horizon refusing to move closer, only stretching further away. Back at the bus, the shade shifted and thinned. Metal grew hot. Radios still answered with static. And on the road, the walkers slowed, someone stopping, hands on knees, saying they just needed a moment. Another turning back and realizing how far they had come, how quiet the world had become, how final the choice now felt. Because in the desert, decisions did not argue back. They simply waited to be paid for. The road group slowed as the heat thickened, steps losing rhythm, the asphalt shimmering, distance turning elastic. One person insisting they could see something ahead, a bend, a sign, anything, while another checked the sun and realized it was already too high, too fast. Water bottles lighter now, sips smaller, mouths dry enough to sting. The desert offering no shade and no sound, just breath and footfall, and the quiet fear that movement was costing more than it gave. Someone stumbled, not falling, just enough to break the illusion. The group stopping without agreement, hands on knees, eyes down, sweat darkening clothes. The road curving slightly and hiding what came next. The bus now a pale shape far behind, smaller than memory. The first doubt surfacing openly. Maybe they should turn back. Maybe waiting was safer than guessing. But turning back meant admitting the distance already paid for nothing. At the bus, the metal burned to the touch, shade thinning as the sun climbed, people rotating positions to stay out of direct light, counting minutes without clocks. The radio checked again and again like a ritual. Static unchanged. Someone tearing fabric to cover skin. Another digging shallow hollows in the sand for cooler ground. The smell of hot rubber and oil growing stronger. A reminder that the bus was not shelter forever, just delay. On the road, the pause stretched too long. One person sat down hard and didn't rise immediately. Eyes unfocused, words slow. Another waved it off, saying they just needed rest. But everyone saw it. The early signs they'd heard about and hoped never to recognize. The heat pressing closer, patience thinning. The idea of turning back colliding with pride and fear. No choice clean anymore. The decision came late and badly. Half the group turning back, the others insisting on pushing forward. Voices strained, not angry yet but close. Separation happening again, smaller now, riskier, backs turning, footsteps diverging. The desert watching without reaction, because out here there was no referee. No second chance, only distance, heat, and the quiet understanding spreading through all of them. Wherever you went next, you would have to finish it. Those who turned back toward the bus walked slower than they wanted to admit, the heat already changing the math. The road longer now, softer underfoot. The bus not growing closer the way it should have. Mirage bending distance, doubt pressing harder with every step. One person stopping often, insisting they were fine, voice too bright. Confidence arriving where it didn't belong. At the bus, the air felt heavier. Metal radiating heat like a held breath. Shade reduced to a thin, crooked line that everyone competed for without speaking. Skin burning where it touched vinyl or steel. Water rationed again. Even smaller sips now. Lips cracked, tongues thick. Someone vomiting dryly and apologizing for it. Another person tearing pages from a notebook to shade their neck. The radio lifted once more. Turned slowly, carefully, as if patience alone might change the answer. But static stayed static. On the road ahead, the smaller group pushed on. Quieter now. Steps uneven. Conversation gone. The sun directly overhead. No breeze at all. The desert flattening sound and thought. One person dropping behind without comment. Another slowing to stay close. Fear becoming practical. stripped of drama, just a steady awareness of limits being reached one by one. The return group saw the bus again at last, relief arriving too early, because relief cost energy they didn't have. The shade already crowded, the ground around it scraped and disturbed, signs of waiting etched into the sand. Sitting down felt dangerous now, but standing felt worse. Time stretching strangely, minutes thick and heavy. Someone whispering that rescue had to come soon, had to, because anything else felt impossible to imagine. By afternoon, the first real collapse happened, quiet and almost gentle. A body sliding down into the sand without warning. Eyes unfocused, skin hot and dry. No panic yet, just urgency. Sharpening suddenly, water poured too fast. Shade rearranged again, voices rising despite attempts to stay calm. Everyone realizing at the same moment that the desert had moved from pressure to action, that this was no longer about decisions but damage, and whatever happened next would be measured not in miles or hours, but in who could still stand when the sun finally began to fall. The collapse changed the rhythm of everything. Movement slowed, voices dropped. The desert suddenly felt closer, more personal. Shade reorganized without discussion, bodies pressed together under the narrow line cast by the bus. Someone fanning uselessly with a shirt. Another counting breaths out loud to stay focused. Water redistributed again, now with hesitation, now with fear attached to every swallow. The understanding settling in that this was no longer about comfort, but about keeping one person conscious long enough for the sun to move. They tried to cool the body with what little they had. Damp cloths placed and replaced, sand scraped away to reach cooler ground. Someone insisting they should lift the person and move them, someone else arguing they shouldn't risk it, that moving now could make it worse. The debate sharp but quiet, because shouting cost energy and energy was running out. Far down the road, the remaining walkers were barely moving, their separation now measured in instinct rather than distance. One person talking steadily just to hear a voice, the other nodding without really listening. Steps dragging, the asphalt too bright to look at directly. Every stop feeling longer than intended. Turning back no longer an option but a memory. The bus now invisible behind heat and curvature. Rescue an idea rather than an expectation. At the wreck, time thickened, the sun refusing to shift. The collapsed passengers stirring briefly, mumbling words that didn't connect. Hope flaring too fast and dying just as quickly. Someone whispering a name, someone else turning away. The radio tried again out of habit more than belief. Static filling the silence like mockery. The desert unmoved. Patient. Exact. And then, just when the heat felt unbearable, when the idea of lasting another hour seemed unrealistic, a sound cut through the stillness, faint at first, mechanical, distant, a vibration rather than a noise, heads lifting slowly, not daring to hope. Eyes narrowing toward the road, because in the desert false hope was dangerous, but the sound grew clearer, steady, unmistakable. And for the first time since the crash, the waiting shifted. Not toward relief yet, but toward something unknown, something approaching, something that would decide whether this story ended here or continued at a cost no one was ready to count. The sound grew closer but refused to become clear. Not a siren, not voices, just a low mechanical presence that came and went with the wind. Hope rising too fast and forcing itself back down. People standing despite exhaustion, shielding their eyes, afraid to move in case it vanished. The collapsed passenger stirring again. Breath shallow, skin still hot. Someone whispering that this had to be it. That nothing else made sense. Minutes passed and the sound shifted. Drifting away, then returning. Not on the road, but somewhere off to the east. Uneven, unreliable. The realization landing hard that it wasn't coming for them. It was simply passing through the same empty space. A distant truck on a different route. An aircraft too high or too far. Hope draining as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind something sharper, heavier, anger mixed with despair. The group tried to reorganize, But the heat stole structure from every plan. Someone suggesting moving the collapsed passenger farther under the bus. Another pointing out there was no more shade to gain. Hands shaking as water was rationed again. The last bottle opened with hesitation. No one wanting to be the one who finished it. Silence settling in thicker than before. Down the road, the last two walkers finally stopped. Not together, but close enough to see each other breathe. One sinking to the asphalt, the other standing over them uncertainly. The sun pressing straight down, thoughts slowing, words coming out wrong. The certainty forming that neither could make it back now. The distance no longer measurable in steps, but in strength already spent. Back at the bus, as afternoon began to tilt toward evening, the light changing just enough to offer the idea of relief. The truth became unavoidable. Rescue was not imminent. Waiting alone would not save everyone, and a new decision pressed forward, harder than the last, whether to risk one final move, one last signal, one person walking, or to stay together and accept whatever the desert decided to take before night arrived. The decision formed slowly and then all at once, not spoken at first, just felt. The understanding that staying meant watching the weakest fade while daylight bled away. That night would bring cold sharp enough to finish what heat had started. Someone finally saying it out loud. That one person should walk again, not far, just enough to reach higher ground or flag the road. The words hanging heavy, dangerous, because everyone knew what walking had already cost. Arguments followed, quieter than before, stripped of confidence, no one volunteering. No one refusing either, eyes avoiding each other, the collapsed passenger barely responsive now, breath shallow, someone gripping their hand just to feel movement, water gone, shade useless as the sun slid lower but still burned, time suddenly urgent in a new way. At last one figure stepped forward, not strong, just steady, saying they could still walk, that they would go slow, that waiting felt worse than trying. The group helping them prepare with what little remained. A strip of fabric for the head, a piece of metal angled for reflection. Directions agreed on, that meant almost nothing in a place this flat, this empty. The walker left without ceremony. Footsteps measured, deliberate, shrinking quickly against the road. The rest watching until heat and distance erased the shape. Silence returning heavier than before. No one speaking now. All attention pulled inward. Counting breaths, watching the sky change color, hoping movement somewhere else would still mean something here. As evening crept closer, the collapsed passenger stirred one last time, eyes opening briefly, unfocused, a sound escaping that might have been a word, hands tightening weakly, then relaxing again. The group frozen between action and fear, realizing that whatever came next, rescue or darkness, would arrive too late for some choices to be undone, because the desert had already taken its measure, and it never gave anything back for free. Night arrived faster than expected, the sun dropping behind the flat horizon without ceremony, heat draining away and leaving a brittle chill behind. Bodies shivering now for a different reason. Muscles tight, skin sticky with dried sweat. The bus creaking softly as metal cooled, darkness spreading in layers until the desert felt closer, narrower, the world reduced to breath. Faint stars, and the shape of the wreck beside them. They huddled together instinctively, sharing warmth they barely had, listening for footsteps that did not come, for engines that never rose. Every sound amplified now, wind brushing sand, fabric shifting. Someone coughing too hard and then apologizing. The collapsed passenger barely moving, breath shallow and irregular, hands cold now. The change noticed immediately, fear tightening its grip without shouting. Far down the road, the lone walker moved in short segments, stopping often, the night stealing depth and distance. Headlights appearing once, briefly, far away, and then gone, leaving behind a sharper silence. The walker standing still for a long time after that, weighing whether to follow the road or the sound, knowing that choosing wrong now meant choosing it forever. At the bus, time fractured, minutes stretching, then disappearing. Someone whispering that they heard something, another saying it was only wind. The radio checked again despite the cold, biting fingers. Static unchanged, the understanding settling deeper that rescue tonight was unlikely, that survival now depended on lasting until morning, on bodies holding together long enough to see light again. And just before full darkness claimed everything, as the stars sharpened overhead and the desert cooled into something hard and unforgiving, a new sound emerged, faint but deliberate. Not mechanical this time, not wind, but a human voice carried thinly across the distance, unclear, fragile, enough to freeze everyone in place. Because hope returned in the desert the same way danger did, quietly, without warning, and never without cost. The voice came again, clearer now but still fragile, carried unevenly through the cooling desert air. A single word stretched thin before breaking apart, everyone freezing instinctively, afraid that movement might shatter it, hearts pounding louder than the sound itself. Someone shouting back without thinking, voice cracking, lungs burning, the night swallowing most of it. But not all, because the answer came quicker this time, closer, undeniable. They moved together despite exhaustion, careful and clumsy, guided by sound rather than sight, hands brushing against the bus for balance before letting go, stepping into darkness that felt deeper than it should have been, flashlights flickering weakly, beams cutting narrow and unreliable tunnels through sand and shadow, fear tightening with every step forward because moving now meant committing, not knowing what they would find. Two stayed behind with the collapsed passenger, wrapping what little fabric remained tighter, whispering constantly, not to comfort, but to confirm life, breath shallow and uneven, skin cold now, the change undeniable, eyes lifting again and again toward the darkness where the others had gone, counting seconds without clocks, afraid of silence returning. On the road, the lone walker heard the voices too, overlapping now, distant but real. Relief hitting hard enough to make their knees buckle, turning back toward the sound, shouting until their throat burned raw, stumbling once, catching themselves barely, legs trembling, the distance finally paying something back. Not safety, not rescue, but contact. The simplest proof that they were not alone anymore. When the groups met, it was sudden and awkward. Shapes emerging from darkness too close, hands grabbing arms instinctively, voices overlapping in disbelief. No celebration, no relief yet, only breath, touch, and immediate counting. Who was missing? Who was weak? Who could still walk? The reality settling in fast. That reunion did not mean rescue. It only meant another chance to decide. And as they turned back together toward the dark shape of the bus, slower now, colder. The desert silent around them. Everyone understood the same thing without saying it. Survival was still uncertain, and morning was still far away. The bus emerged from the darkness slowly, familiar but no longer comforting. Its metal cold now, sharp to the touch, people moving around it with stiff, careful motions, conserving strength that barely remained, those who had stayed behind rising awkwardly, relief flickering briefly before fading when they saw the faces returning from the road, read the posture, understood instantly that nothing had been solved, only delayed. They gathered around the collapsed passenger together, movements deliberate, practiced now through exhaustion, hands checking skin, breath, response, waiting through long seconds for the smallest sign, a shallow inhale, a weak movement, enough to keep trying but not enough to promise survival, bodies closing in tighter as the night deepened, sharing warmth, fear, responsibility. The desert silent and indifferent around them, stars sharp overhead. Time stretched thin and uneven, no one truly sleeping, eyes closing only to snap open again at imagined sounds, every shift of wind triggering attention. The radio lifted once more out of habit rather than belief. Static answering patiently, the same as before, someone unconsciously marking the horizon again and again, waiting for light, because dawn now felt like the only plan left. the only thing still moving toward them. Cold replaced heat slowly but relentlessly. Muscles tightening, shivering, beginning quietly and then spreading. The collapsed passenger stirring once, murmuring something unintelligible, hope rising too fast and being forced back down, people whispering to stay awake, to keep talking, because silence felt dangerous now, like giving permission for the desert to finish what it had started. Then, just before the sky began to pale, a sound cut through the stillness, distant but steady, unmistakable, an engine approaching without fading, headlights cresting the road slowly, deliberately, disbelief freezing everyone in place until the vehicle drew close enough to stop, doors opening. Voices calling out, the ordinary miracle of help arriving when no one believed it still could. And later, much later, after water and shade and movement returned, the desert looked the same as it always had, flat and empty. But for those who stood there at sunrise, it would never be just a road again, because survival had not been the crash, not the heat, not the night. It had been the decisions carried through when stopping felt easier and walking felt impossible. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to read more survival stories.